for the City of London, he'll be really good news for our financial services industry, because he'll understand far more about it than clearly Gordon, who obviously is a moron. I haven't got much confidence in Mr. Cameron being good for the city, and I certainly haven't got much confidence in George Osborne being a good Chancellor. And I'll tell you why. He's never had a job. He's never worked in the real world. He hasn't run a company, he hasn't been in the army, he hasn't run a charity, he's never had a job. And David Cameron only briefly had a job after his masterpiece of advising Norman Lamont how Britain should stay within the exchange rate mechanism. You know, these people have no real experience of business or life, therefore they are virtually indistinguishable from the front bench of the Labour Party. We've got a class of politician in Westminster. I mean, they're all so searingly earnest, aren't they? You know, and they go on the televisions and they say, well, yes, I do believe this and I feel very passionately about this subject. You think, oh, God. And it's Balls and it's Miliband, but it's Osborne as well. And frankly, they are career politicians. But even that, ladies and gentlemen, isn't the point. The point that I'm addressing tonight, I want to talk about Britain's biggest industry. I want to talk about financial services. I want to talk about the City of London. And the point that I want to make to you tonight, and if you don't remember anything else I've said, please take this point on board. It doesn't matter a damn to Britain's banking, insurance or broking business who wins the next general election, because it is not the British government, it is not the British Parliament that is accountable to us, who now is in charge of regulating Britain's financial services. That has been transferred, lock, stock and barrel, to the institutions of the European Union. The only difference that a Conservative government would make is that they might have the inclination to do away with the new 50p tax ban, although they've already announced that they're not going to do that. So we have power over domestic taxes, but we do not have power over how we regulate the City of London. Now, I remember when I was first elected as an MEP back in 1999, and that was a fairly extraordinary event. Nobody had given UKIP a cat's chance in hell. And I'll never forget the evening, we all arrived at the Count, and I was quietly optimistic about all of this. And there were one or two quite aggressive interviews by the BBC, and then it became clear that I was going to get elected. And this was about sort of 10:30, 11 o'clock. It was looking good. The numbers looked right. And I began to become quite excited about all of this. And there was the odd Colt sort of popping out of the odd champagne bottle, and it was all looking good. Now, it hadn't really occurred to me that once I was elected, I might have to do a few TV interviews. And so the first ever TV interview I did, and I'm very proud of it, because I think it was still the best interview I've ever given in my life. And there I was, and the local ITV crew from Meridian Television thrust a microphone in front of me, and the camera was there, and the reporter said, Mr. Farage, he said, you said you'd do it, none of us believed you, you've been elected to the European Parliament, you're an MEP, and next week you'll be off on Eurostar to Brussels, where you will find a never-ending round of invitations for lunches, for dinners, for champagne receptions. Do you think that you'll be corrupted by the lifestyle? And I replied live on air, and it is without doubt the best answer I've ever given. No, I've always lived like that. which certainly, having worked here in the 80s, is true. I remember, within a few weeks of getting there, my initial suspicions about what this European single market might be, which I first saw and read about in 1986, were beginning to come true. Because what we've had, and you as practitioners will know, what we've had since 1999 is the Financial Services Action Plan. 43 different European Union directives that have now already been implemented in the city or are in the process of being implemented. In fact, the truth of it is, the mass of legislation in this industry is such, it is virtually impossible for any practitioner to be compliant at any moment in time, because just the sheer mass of it. So I guess this is manna from heaven for our noble friends down in Canary Wharf at the FSA. This wonderful new tick box culture that we've got. Get rid of all the experts in the Bank of England, replace it with a bunch of failed traders and utterly useless people who are FSA bureaucrats who, when they do an inspection, just tick a series of boxes. That, I'm afraid, is what I believe regulation in financial services has sunk to. So if anybody is here from the FSA, I hope you have a thoroughly miserable evening. But the difficulty is this. However difficult the Financial Services Action Plan may have been, and there's no doubt that the Markets Abuse Directive and MiFID and all the rest of it, I mean, it's an absolute boom, I guess, for compliance officers as well. One or two of them are okay, not very many, but one or two are. But the difficulty is this, that to date, what that has done is to begin to damage the city's competitiveness. But it's only begun to do it. Certainly in areas like reinsurance, it's had quite an impact. And you'll notice how much of Britain's reinsurance business has fled to Bermuda over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. And this is the point. The point is, this is not like a manufacturing industry that loses money over a period of time and in the end the car plant has to close. The point about financial services, and we saw it with the growth in London of the Eurobond market, we see it all the time, is that actually the city can lose what it's doing well virtually overnight. Virtually overnight. And I'll come back to that perhaps in a second. Now the danger now is that one of the things in Brussels that is almost a given is that any crisis is seen to be by the Eurocrats a beneficial crisis, an opportunity to extend their power. Now the first sign of this that I got was last summer. I was doing a TV debate last summer. It was a BBC World debate and it was about trade. And I was on with a guy called Paul Rasmussen. He's a socialist, a former Prime Minister of Denmark, and now a senior MEP. And we had the debate about trade, and he said how it was vital that the EU together negotiated trade deals, and I said it was moronic for the world's fifth largest... I always try and put it in a very straightforward manner, you know. And it was moronic for the world's fifth largest nation to be forbidden from making her own trade deals with other parts of the world, and wouldn't it be rather a good start if we looked at the English-speaking world and the Commonwealth as our very, very first port of anyway, we had this debate to and fro. And after the debate, as the mics were being taken off and the makeup was coming off, after that, Rasmussen said to me, he said, "We're after you." I thought, oh, well, yet another fan I've made in the European Parliament. He said, "We're after you." I said, oh, well, that's awfully nice of you, thank you. He said, "No, I don't mean you." He said, "We're after your City of London. We don't like your Anglo-Saxon method of doing business, and we are going to close you down." Now, I would suggest to you that when a former Prime Minister of a European member state, who is now part of the European Union's Economic and Monetary Committee, makes that comment to me, he actually means it. Well, what's happened? Well, I'll tell you what's happened in the wake of the crisis. In the European Parliament, there was a resolution that was put up 5 months ago. And the resolution was to urge the European Commission. Now remember, the Parliament has no real power. The real power in Brussels is with the unelected European Commission. They are the government of Europe. These, of course, are people that you can't vote for. These, of course, are people that you can't remove. Though invariably, they are very high-caliber people. Mr. Kinnock is perhaps one example. Mr. Mandelson another. And the current one, the current one, Baroness Ashton, having studied her CV, her only claim to fame was she worked as a back office clerk for CND for 18 months as a student, but never mind. It's the Commission that have the power. So it was a resolution from the Parliament urging the Commission to bring in legislation to regulate the hedge funds. Now, I did speak in this debate, and I made the point that the hedge funds had nothing whatsoever to do with the credit crunch. That all a hedge fund can do in terms of markets is it can accelerate the pace at which a share goes down or the pace at which a share goes up. But in terms of the credit problem that we had, the hedge funds were broadly an irrelevancy. And yet, do you know, and especially those of you here who think Call Me Dave is going to be a wonderful Prime Minister, do you know that the Labour and Liberal Democrats voted for this measure, and that the British Conservative MEPs were three-line whipped to vote for this measure. Three-line whipped to vote for a measure that will destroy an industry, 85% of which in the European time zone is in St James's. And of course, you may have seen that a combination of this legislation now looming on the horizon and a combination of the 50p tax has meant that the exodus has already begun. You will see just in the last week that Guy Hands from Terra Firma Private Equity has gone to Guernsey. You'll see in the last week that Chris Binodi, a big hedge fund manager, has gone. So the exodus has gone. And I was talking to a hedge fund manager the other week who I thought perhaps might be supportive of the European election campaign. And I said, well, you must be very worried about this European legislation and what it might